The moment I stepped into the lobby, I could feel an energy that didn't belong to an ordinary Tuesday morning. The reception staff were whispering, heads bent over their desks. Servers from the flagship restaurant had slipped upstairs, still in their uniforms, as if drawn by the same invisible thread. I adjusted my jacket and made my way toward the executive floor. 12 years here had taught me to read the mood of the building, and today it was humming with something between excitement and apprehension. When the elevator doors opened, I saw her immediately. Vanessa Chen stood in the center of the hallway, surrounded by department heads. Tall, perfectly styled, every gesture deliberate. She wore the kind of confidence only Paris could teach, the kind that made people lean in without realizing. "Daniel," she said warmly, stepping forward as if we were old friends. "I've heard so much about you." "Likewise," I replied, offering a polite smile. Her grip was firm, but there was a calculation in her eyes, like she was already measuring the space I occupied. Our CEO, her father, emerged from his office with a proud, almost paternal grin. "Daniel, meet our new Global Menu Innovation Director. Vanessa's here to help us take the brand to the next level." I congratulated her. Genuinely. Change was inevitable in this industry, but there was a difference between evolution and erasing a foundation. The CEO didn't linger. "I'm leaving for a 3-week investor trip this afternoon. You two will have plenty of time to get acquainted." As he disappeared down the hall, Vanessa began outlining her arrival schedule to the team tasting sessions, supplier meetings, concept reviews. She spoke with clarity, but her words painted a vision so far from the core identity we'd built that I felt a quiet unease settle in my chest. Then I noticed him, standing slightly behind her, holding a leather-bound planner. Was Oliver Grant? I'd seen him before, Vanessa's assistant, the one who seemed to know everyone's business. He stepped forward, offering his hand. "Daniel Reyes." I introduced myself. "I know who you are," he said smoothly, his handshake just a shade too firm. His smile was practiced, polite, and utterly devoid of warmth. As I walked toward my office, I could still feel his eyes on my back, weighing something, filing it away for later. 2 days later, the conference room smelled faintly of truffle oil and citrus zest. Vanessa had transformed the weekly culinary strategy meeting into a full presentation, complete with glossy mood boards, projected slides, and a line of sample plates arranged like an art installation along the side table. She stood at the head of the table, chin high, eyes bright. 70% of our signature menu will be reimagined, she announced, her voice carrying an edge of certainty that brooked no hesitation. We'll move toward avant-garde fusion, unexpected pairings, visual theatrics, dishes that photograph as beautifully as they taste. This is how we'll secure Michelin recognition. I studied the slides: yuzu foamed ribeye, squid ink macarons, lobster ice cream. The artistry was undeniable, but so were the challenges. "Vanessa," I began carefully. "There's merit in refreshing the menu, but changing 70% in one cycle is ambitious. Ingredient sourcing alone will be a nightmare, and our kitchen teams will need extensive retraining. More importantly, our core patrons come here because they trust certain dishes to be exactly as they remember." Her gaze didn't waver. "If we want to grow, we can't be afraid to alienate the old guard." "It's not fear," I said evenly. "It's balance. Innovation works best when it builds on trust, not replaces it." A murmur passed around the table, some nodding in agreement, others watching her reaction. Vanessa smiled, but it was tight. "Noted," she said. Moving on to the next slide. After the meeting, as I collected my notes, I caught a fragment of conversation behind me. Oliver's voice, low and measured. "He's afraid of change." He murmured to her, protective of his turf. You can't let that slow you down. I didn't turn. Years in kitchens had taught me that some knives cut deeper when they're used in whispers. As I left the room, Vanessa was laughing softly at something Oliver had said, her eyes drifting toward me only for a moment, measured, assessing, already recalculating the space I occupied in her vision. By the following week, a subtle shift had taken hold. The recap emails from our meetings, compiled and distributed by Oliver, landed in everyone's inbox each evening. At first glance, they looked routine, but the language was slanted. Daniel expressed hesitation regarding key innovations. One read, "Concerns raised by Daniel suggest a reluctance to adapt," said another. "No outright lies, just enough shading to paint me as the lone resistor in a sea of enthusiasm." Soon after, I noticed my calendar thinning. Critical tasting sessions for the new menu were happening without me. I'd hear about them in passing from sous chefs, their voices careful, as though they weren't sure if I'd been left out intentionally or by mistake. When I approached Vanessa about it, she smiled politely. "We're just trying to keep things nimble. You'll be looped in when it's time for operational input." Operational input. As if 12 years of creative direction could be distilled to supply chain checklists and plating schematics. Then came the test run. Vanessa's dishes, dazzling to look at, rolled out across a select number of private events. I reviewed the invoices afterward, imports flown in overnight, specialty equipment rentals, overtime hours piling up. The numbers made my stomach tighten. This wasn't sustainable, not even for our flagship. Yet the weekly budget report told a different story. Costs were neatly massaged, overruns hidden under vague promotional investment lines. I didn't need to guess who had prepared the summary for the CEO's review. One evening, I stayed late to catch up on paperwork. Through the glass wall of her office, I saw Vanessa leaning over Oliver's desk, laughing at something on his laptop screen. A spreadsheet glowed faintly on the monitor. The next morning, at our senior team briefing, Vanessa announced the test run had been a resounding success under budget. Applause followed. I kept my expression neutral, even as I felt the walls shift another inch, narrowing around me. The cracks had begun to form not in the menu, but in the ground beneath us, and I could already feel the tremor building. The menu review was already running hot when I walked in. Chefs and managers crowded the long table, plates of Vanessa's latest creations arranged in precise symmetry. The air smelled of smoke-infused rosemary and burnt sugar. Vanessa was mid-presentation, speaking about expanding the new dishes to all flagship locations within the quarter. I listened, letting her finish before leaning forward. "Vanessa, I began evenly. The concept is creative, but scaling this in 3 months will strain supply lines, overwhelm training schedules, and risk consistency. We could phase it in, start with 2 locations, monitor performance, and adjust before a full rollout." A pause. She smiled, but it was the brittle kind that cracks if held too long. "So you think I'm overreaching? I think it's about protecting the brand's reputation," I said, keeping my tone steady. "Our diners expect excellence every time. We can't risk a stumble on this scale." From the corner, Oliver's voice slid into the silence, pitched just low enough to sound casual. "Some people just aren't ready for change. Vanessa," her head snapped toward me, "your experience," she said, voice rising, "means nothing compared to my prestigious degree. I studied under the best in Paris. You've been running the same tired menu for years." The room went still. I heard someone shift in their chair. "If that's how you see it," I replied, my voice calm, "then I can't help you protect what we've built." "You're right," she said sharply. "You can't. Effective immediately. You're done here." There was a collective intake of breath. My gaze swept the room chefs I'd mentored, managers I'd trained. None spoke. From the corner, Oliver's smirk was small but unmistakable, the kind that feeds on the silence of a room. I gathered my notes without a word, the scrape of my chair against the floor louder than anything else in that moment, and then I walked out, leaving the hum of whispers in my wake. I cleared out my office in under an hour. No dramatic speeches, no parting shots, just the quiet removal of 12 years' worth of cookbooks, notes, and framed photos. A few colleagues stopped by under the pretense of returning a pen or asking a question, their eyes betraying more than their words could risk. "Daniel, this is insane," one sous chef muttered in the doorway. "She can't run this place without you." I only smiled faintly. Then she'll learn that herself. By the end of the day, my phone was buzzing with messages from competitor restaurants, some dangling signing bonuses that would have made me blink a year ago. I thanked them all but declined. Leaving for another kitchen wasn't the point. 3 days later, the cracks began to show. A supplier called me directly, confused about last-minute cancellations on specialty orders. I told him to speak with the new menu team. Later, a former line cook texted VIP table tonight. Wrong garnish. Cold entree. Vanessa is fuming. By the end of the week, the flagship was struggling. Ingredient shortages forced substitutions that clashed with the plated designs. Timing was off entrees arriving before appetizers, sauces breaking under the heat lamps. Complaints trickled in, some from regulars who rarely spoke up. Then came the one that couldn't be ignored. Late Friday afternoon, I got a call from Marco Alvarez, a patron who'd been dining with us since the opening night. He didn't mince words. "Daniel, I just had the worst meal I've ever had there." What happened? When I told him I no longer worked for the group, there was a long silence. Then a sharp inhale. "I'm calling your CEO tonight." I didn't ask him to. I didn't need to. That evening, as I set down my phone, a part of me knew the ripples were already reaching farther than Vanessa or Oliver expected. The only question was how quickly they would realize the source. It was Sunday morning when my phone rang. The number was international, but I knew it instantly. "Daniel." The CEO's voice came through, tight and uncharacteristically strained. "I've had 3 board members call me in the last 48 hours. Service is collapsing. VIP complaints, ingredient chaos. What the hell happened?" I let the silence sit for a moment. "You'd have to ask your global menu innovation director." There was a pause. "I'm not asking her. I'm asking you. Come back. Now." It wasn't the first time he'd been blunt with me, but this felt different, less like an order. More like a lifeline he didn't want to admit needing. "I'll return," I said slowly, "but only under one condition. Name it. The truth comes out." About Oliver's manipulations, about why I was pushed out in the first place. I'm not stepping back into that kitchen just to be undermined again. He exhaled sharply, the sound of a man calculating both risk and relief. "Done. Be here tomorrow morning. I'll set the meeting myself." When the call ended, I sat for a long moment, the hum of the refrigerator in my apartment the only sound. I wasn't coming back for redemption. I was coming back to clear the rot before it spread any further. The next day, as I stepped into the elevator at headquarters, I could feel the same buzz in the air as the week Vanessa arrived, but this time it carried an edge. Word had traveled. Chefs passing in the hall glanced my way, some hiding their smiles, others simply nodding as if to say, "Finally." The elevator chimed, and the doors opened to the executive floor. I stepped out, ready to face the room that had watched me leave in silence. The boardroom was already full when I walked in. Vanessa sat near the head of the table, posture rigid, eyes fixed on her notes. Oliver was beside her, that same leather-bound planner at his elbow. The CEO stood at the far end, arms folded, the weight of his stare moving from one face to another. "Let's get to it," he said. gesturing for me to begin. I opened the folder in front of me and slid copies of my report across the table. Since my departure, ingredient shortages have doubled, kitchen errors have increased by 30%, and VIP complaints have spiked to levels we've never seen in 12 years. These aren't isolated incidents, they're systemic failures. Vanessa shifted in her seat but said nothing. I continued, and they didn't happen overnight. They began with the test run for the new menu, the reported budget success. It was fiction. The CEO raised an eyebrow. Prove it. I nodded to the IT director, who connected a laptop to the projector. A series of emails filled the screen, internal correspondence between Oliver and Vanessa, meeting notes, cost reports. Only these weren't the same notes I'd seen during those weeks. Original records show cost overruns of 35%. I explained, but the final reports you received had those figures buried under vague expense lines. The CEO's expression hardened as he scrolled. These changes weren't accidental. I turned toward Vanessa. You were told I was obstructive, that I feared change. Those words didn't come from me. They were crafted to push you into seeing me as the enemy. Her gaze flicked to Oliver, and for the first time, her confidence faltered. Oliver, the CEO, asked, his voice cold. Oliver straightened in his chair, lips parting as if to speak, but whatever excuse he'd prepared, it was already too late. The room had shifted, and everyone could feel it. The CEO's hand came down flat on the table. Enough. This ends now. And with that, the balance of power began to tilt. Vanessa's voice was quiet when she finally spoke. Is this true? Her eyes stayed on Oliver, searching for something, an explanation, a denial, anything that could make the evidence on the screen vanish. Oliver leaned forward, his tone measured, almost paternal. I was protecting you. Daniel was undermining your authority from the start. I simply made sure the team stayed loyal while you established your vision. That's not loyalty, I said evenly. That's sabotage. The CEO's jaw tightened. You manipulated reports, altered meeting notes, and concealed budget overruns, all to pit two of my most senior people against each other. Oliver spread his hands. Palms up. And yet, I kept the launch on track. You kept the truth from me. The CEO cut in, his voice sharp enough to slice through the air. You're finished here. Effective immediately. The room was silent except for the faint shuffle of chairs as Oliver closed his planner and rose. He didn't look at me on his way out. Vanessa's eyes followed him until the door clicked shut. The CEO exhaled, then turned to her. Vanessa, you made mistakes. So did I, by not being here to guide this transition. But the brand can't afford any more division. She nodded slowly, the fight in her posture softening. Here's what's going to happen. He continued. Daniel, you're reinstated as Creative Culinary Director. Vanessa, you will continue as Global Menu Innovation Director, and the two of you will co-lead the development of a hybrid menu, one that honors our classics and introduces fresh innovation. I glanced at her, expecting resistance. Instead, she met my gaze with something closer to resolve than defiance. If we're doing this, she said, we're doing it right. No compromises on quality either way. That, I replied, we can agree on. The CEO gave a curt nod. Good. You have 4 weeks to present the new lineup. I want both of your signatures on every dish that makes the cut. It wasn't a truce yet, but it was a start. And in the culinary world, a start like a first course set the tone for everything that followed. The first week was a battle of styles. Vanessa arrived to our planning sessions with sketches that looked more like gallery installations than plated meals. I countered with spreadsheets detailing prep times, portion yields, and supplier reliability. We circled each other like two chefs fighting for the same burner. On day 3, We nearly derailed the entire dessert lineup over plating. She wanted a deconstructed pavlova served on hand-blown glass domes. I pointed out that hand-washing fragile. Custom glassware for 300 covers a night was an operational nightmare. She bristled, but by the next morning, she'd sourced an alternative sleek porcelain that still carried the drama, but stacked neatly for service, little by little. The tension shifted. She began asking about the mechanics of scaling dishes across locations. I started listening, really listening to how she layered unexpected flavors without losing balance. One afternoon, she presented a version of our signature braised short ribs, glazed with tamarind and garnished with micro cilantro. I wanted to hate it, but the bite was rich, bright, and addictive. We argued plenty over portion sizes too small, I'd say. Elegant, she'd counter. Over flavor intensity, subtle. She'd insist. Flat, I'd push back. But somewhere between the disagreements, mutual respect began to take root. By the second week, we had a working draft of the hybrid menu, 12 reimagined classics, 8 bold newcomers. The final test was a series of private tastings, one for a selection of our most loyal patrons, another for a panel of food critics whose pens could make or break us. The night of the first tasting, I watched the expressions around the table as each course arrived. Surprise, curiosity, and then, most importantly, satisfaction. The short ribs drew murmurs of approval. The revamped seafood risotto, infused with lemongrass, had guests asking for seconds. The critics' session was even sharper, every forkful followed by scribbled notes. When they left, I expected at least one lukewarm reaction. Instead, the early feedback that trickled back was unanimous. The menu was daring but grounded, elegant without pretension. For the first time in weeks, Vanessa and I exchanged a smile that wasn't tinged with challenge. It felt like the first true step toward launch. Launch night felt different from any service I'd worked in years. The dining room was booked solid, the hum of conversation spilling through the open kitchen passed like a low, steady drumbeat. The scent of seared scallops and slow-braised meats wrapped itself around the air, mingling with the sharper notes of citrus and fresh herbs from the newer plates. Vanessa stood beside me at the expo station, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled up. She called out plating cues in sync with my timing. No hesitation, no second guessing. The rhythm was smooth, almost seamless. Course after course left the kitchen the tamarind-glazed short ribs that had won over the loyalists, the lemongrass risotto that had impressed the critics, the deconstructed pavlova now served on sleek porcelain that caught the light just right. From the pass, I could see diners leaning forward over their plates, eyes widening, smiles forming before the first bite even touched their lips. By the time dessert service began, the buzz in the room was undeniable. Guests lingered, ordering an extra glass of wine, unwilling to let the evening end. Out in the dining room, journalists scribbled in notebooks between bites, their cameras discreet but persistent. When the last table was served, the staff gathered briefly at the kitchen entrance. The general manager read out the numbers record-breaking sales for a single night in the flagship's history. Media coverage was already trickling online, a menu that bridges generations. One headline read, "The CEO approached," his expression a rare blend of relief and pride. "Daniel," he said, "you're reinstated as creative culinary director." He turned to Vanessa. "And you'll continue as global menu innovation director only now, with the grounding you've earned these past weeks." After the dinner, Vanessa and I crossed paths near the wine station for the first time since she'd returned from Paris. Her smile was unguarded. She extended her hand. "Good work," she said simply. I shook it. "You too." From the far side of the room, I caught the CEO watching us, a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. For him, for the brand, for all of us. It seemed the message was clear. Sometimes the recipe for success needs both old flavors and new ideas.